The Rebbe Zilgazunzheim began the Farbrengen this afternoon that in every matter there are general points, inyonim kloliyim, as well as inyonim protiyim, details. And being that everything is created from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it means that the general points, as well as the more detailed points, in every single inyan, come directly from Hashem. And with a lengthy introduction, the Rebbe elaborated how really everything which happens here, lamata, here in this world, happens so because this is the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this is how these inyanim are lamayla. And the Rebbe raised right away the question, at times we find in Chazal the expression, a mashal, a parable, comparing HaKadosh Baruch Hu to a king, mashal, a melech basav adam. Truth is, not the pshat that the Eibishter is doing so because a king does so, because a king on this world does so. It's the contrary. Why is it that there are certain routines and certain customs and arrangements which are set up in kingdoms and in world leaderships, lamata? It is so because it's a reflection, because this inyan is that way, lamayla. In other words, malchusa da'ara, which is the world, this world, kingdoms on this world, are a reflection of malchusa derekia, of the malchus, of the kingdom, of the rulership, the way it's set up by HaKadosh Baruch Hu lamala. The only reason we do have these expressions of a mashal usually is we're trying to understand Hashem from the acts of a melech basav adam. This is only, it should be easier for us to understand, but it doesn't mean that the inyan in its true sense, lamitasai, is that way. That why is it lamala that way? Because it is that way lamata? On the contrary, inyanim lamata are a reflection from lamala. With this lengthy introduction, the Rebbe came to it that every inyan, every day has its inyan. Today, we don't have to look far to find what today is. Today is 24 days in the month of Kislev. Regarding 24 days in the month of Kislev, we look into the Torah Oyer of this week's Sedra. The Rebbe again explained that the Torah Oyer is what we would call the Hasidische Sedra. And just like in the regular Sedra of the week, we know in the regular Sedra we have a division of Til Sheni, and then from Sheni to Shlishi, and so forth. So we know that Til Sheni has a shaychus to Sunday, specific shaychus. From Sheni to Shlishi has a shaychus to Monday. And from Shvi to the end of the Sedra has a shaychus to Shabbos. In the Hasidische Sedra, in Torah, there's no division of Sheni, Shlishi, and so forth. However, there are Mamorim which are at the beginning, and there are the Mamorim which are further. Mela, the last Maimer in today's Sedra in Parshas Vayeshev is a Maimer that the contents of the Maimer discusses the inyan of Chanukah. So again we have how the last Chelik of the Hasidische Sedra has a shaychus to today's day, which is the last day of this week, Chav Dalet Kislev. Talking about the Torah, but mentioned that the Torah is Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe. However, the Mamorim were arranged by the Tzemach Tzedek, who was also a Rebbe and a Mamale Mekoimai. He was the Rebbe after the Alter Rebbe. It was the Tzemach Tzedek. It was the Mittler Rebbe, who was the Tzemach Tzedek's father-in-law, the Alter Rebbe's son. And then it was the Tzemach Tzedek himself who took over leadership. And he was the one who arranged and selected which of the Alter Rebbe's Mamorim should go into the Sefer of Torah. So the Alter Rebbe in Torah explains, B'negeya, today's day of Chav Dalet Kislev, that on Chav Dalet Kislev, it was the Nitzochen HaMilchama. In other words, when did the Yidden overcome the Greeks? And the war ended, the battle ended with the Greeks. In the days of Chanukah, it was on this day, on the day of Chav Dalet Kislev. On Chav Hei Kislev, that is when the rest of the miracle happened. The fact that they found a pach shemen, that a little jar of oil was found, and this little bit of oil, instead of lasting only for one day, lasted for 8 days. What do we see from the Alter Rebbe? That there are two nisim, there are two parts to the Nes of Chanukah. The one part is the Nitzachon, the fact that we overcame the Goyim in the battle, in the Milchama, in the war. Then there's the other part of the Nes of Chanukah, is the fact that the little bit of oil was found, which normally would have lasted only for one, and instead of 1 day, it lasted for 8 days. So the Alter Rebbe tells us, when did both of these things happen? These inyanim happened on 2 separate days. If we look into the Rambam, the Rebbe continues, in Hilchas Chanukah, there the Rambam tells us that everything happened on Chof Hei. Sai the Nitzachon HaMelchama, as well as the fact that they found a little bit of oil, everything happened on 1 day. Which day? The 25th day of Kislev. Truth is, the Rebbe says, if we look back, we look into Rishonim, we will see that many of the Rishonim say different than the Rambam. The Rambam is an exception in the fact that he claims that the Nitzachon HaMelchama also took place on the 25th day, and it all came out on the same day. According to the Rambam, the Rebbe says, there was no Nes on the 24th. 24 days in Kislev, really nothing happened. So obviously, if nothing happened 24 days in Kislev, when did they find the oil? The oil was found tomorrow, which is 25 days in Kislev. So obviously, according to the Rambam, when should we begin celebrating Chanukah? In a sense of that, when should we begin lighting the Chanukah candles? Actually, we should begin doing it tomorrow night. Because everything happened from tomorrow and after. Nothing happened today. We fear that we start tonight, sending the licht, because today in the afternoon was already part of the Nes. Tomorrow was the finding of the oil. So tonight we are already celebrating, because really we are in the midst of the day of celebration. It really begins on Chav Dalet. I mentioned when he was talking about it, especially today, the way the Kviyas comes out, today that Chav Dalet Kislev comes out on a Shabbos, and when we will be davening Mincha, we're already not going to say Tzidkas Tzedek. Why? Because it is Erev Chanukah. So today we see an obvious shaychus to Yontif of Chanukah. And the candles, we all fear that we begin lighting the candles tonight. Rebbe says it's hard to say that there were people, the days of the Rambam, that according to the Rambam would not begin lighting candles until tomorrow night. Unless, the Rebbe says, there is a way out to learn as follows. He says, well, it's a very hard way, a very hard approach. It's a bit doichik way to learn. However, we may not have any alternative. By Kotshim, there's a klal, anything that deals with karbonis, there's a klal, halayla hoylech achar hayoim. See, in Jewish calendar we know halayla hoylech achar hayoim, so that would mean that tonight has a shayches still to Shabbos. According to the Rambam. So if tonight has a shayches to Shabbos, the question again is, according to the Rambam, anybody remember? I think the Rebbe wanted to learn that if tonight, if by Kotchem halayla hoylech achar hayoim, according to the Rambam, we would be, that is why we will be able to light the first night, according to us. According to us, it's very, very simply understood. But according to the Rambam even, that is why we would be able to light, because tonight does have a shayches to Chav Hei. Normally we learn Kotchem halayla hoylech achar hayoim that tonight has a shayches to Chav Dalet, by Karbonos. Tonight we're allowed to eat the Karbonos which we brought to the Beis HaMikdash today. This point is not clear. Sorry. Anyways, so again, the Rebbe was looking for a nigla interpretation according to the Rambam, and it's something which he left open. But the Rebbe continued, we do find there's another maimer in Lekutei Torah, and that is in Parshas Sav. In Lekutei Torah in Parshas Sav, it's also discussed this inyan The Alter Rebbe there discusses that by Chanukah and Purim, both Yomim Tovim, it was divided how the Nisim happened. In other words, first it was the Netzachon HaMelchama, then we had the other Nes with the Pach Shem. There the Alter Rebbe explains in Likutei Torah how by Purim it was also that way. There were two in Yonim, like we read in the Megillah. First we had the Netzachon HaMelchama, then came another day which the Yidden asked for. Shushan they asked for an additional day, but even all over Malchus HaChashverosh, they were given on a separate day after Netzachon HaMelchama. Netzachon HaMelchama was on the 13th day of Adar. The 14th day of Adar was set for a Yontif. By Pesach it's different. By Pesach it was the Niguf LeMitzrayim. The Ripur LiYisrael was all on the night of the first night of Pesach. Plague to the Egyptians, as well as helping the Yidden. In other words, that the Yidden were saved and the Rebbe made the Yidden as his nation, that he was taking them out of the Mitzrayim. All of this happened on one night. So the Alter Rebbe, look at the Torah, the Rebbe mentioned that Bichlal, the first one of the Rabbeim, who we find that ties together in Yonim, Al Pi Nigla the Torah, and Pnimi Torah, and gives interpretations that bind both Chelkei HaTorah, this we find starting from the Tzemach Tzedek. The Rebbe says that it is related, that the Chassidim of the Tzemach Tzedek had a hard time in the beginning of the Tzemach Tzedek's leadership adjusting themselves to listening to his Mamorim, because it was like a new style of Mamorim. Until then, they were used to listen to the Mamorim of the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe, when he said a Maimah, the Maimah was only based on Inyanim of Pnimis HaTorah and Inyanim of Chassidus. However, the Tzemach Tzedek began saying Mamorim where he tied together in Yonim Al Pi Nigla and in Yonim Al Pi Chassidus. And the Chassidim at that time were not used to it as yet. So in the Rebbe continues that Bichlal, we find that in every Chassidus, it's usually discussed various Mamorim, the Maila of each Yontif. And whatever Yontif we are talking about, Chassidus always tries to bring out the greatness of this Yontif. For example, the Likutei Torah and Parshas Tzav, Likutei Torah and Parshas Tzav, there the Alter Rebbe is talking, Parshas Tzav, it has to do with Pesach. Pesach usually comes out around the period of Parshas Tzav. So there the Alter Rebbe is praising and uplifting the greatness of the Yontif of Pesach, and explaining that by Pesach something unusual happened, which in other Yomim Tovim it didn't happen. Weiter, in other Mamorim of Chassidus, for example, if we're looking to Chanukah Mamorim, in Chanukah Mamorim we will find that it's explained the greatness of Chanukah as opposed to all other Yomim Tovim. So the Rebbe says the truth is that all of these in Yonim are emes. In Torah emes it is Takya like it is explained each time. However, each of the Yomim Tovim of Takya has in Yonim which the others don't have. Memela, when it comes to that Yontif, it is the custom of the Rabbeim and the custom of Chassidus, when this particular Yontif is explained, to explain how great and outstanding this Yontif is. So that is why in Parshas Tzav, when Alter Rebbe is out to explain the greatness of the Yontif of Pesach, there he says that Pesach has a shaykhis to Memalik Halalman. And being that the Oira Memalik Halalman is something which has no limitations, as opposed to the Oira Soiviv Kalalman has a much higher oil, which is surrounding all of the worlds and not limited, as opposed to Memalik Kalalman as it's explained in Hasidus. That is why the Yontif of Pesach was able to be in such a way that it was a Niguf Limitzrayim, V'Ripur LiYisrael, all in the same date. Though the Alter Rebbe there in Likutei Torah also explains that the Niguf Limitzrayim, V'Ripur LiYisrael, brings from Arizal, it's divided that the Niguf LeMitzrayim happened before Chatzos, until Chatzos, and after Chatzos it was the Ripur LiYisrael. But again, it was all on the same day. However, by Chanukah and by Purim it was not that way. So getting back to today is a real special day. It's the day of Chavdalet Kislev, and this is the day which already a Nes happened, which according to most of the Poskim, except the Rambam, and according to the Alter Rebbe, this is the day when the Nitzachan HaMelchama, this is the day when the Yidden overcame their enemies, and it was already proclaimed that the Yidden have achieved victory over the Greeks, over the Yevanim in the times of the Neis Chanukah. Today's Parsha, let me continue, is the name Parshas Vayeshev. Bechlal, a name is a tremendous inyan. This is what the Alter Rebbe tells us in Shara Yichud V'Amunah, that everything derives its chayis from its name. And this is what we read right away in Chumash Bereishis, that the Rebbe has chosen Adam Arishan to name, give names to Behemoths v'chayis, v'chasimin, so we see that somebody else other than Adam Arishan was not capable of fulfilling this task. That is why the Rebbe has given it to Adam Arishan. So we see how important the name is. The name of today's Sedra is Vayeshev. Vayeshev means he sat back, he rested. But it says furthermore, if we write letters, it is the habit of people that when a letter is written, you always put down a date in the letter. And the date is also this and this day of this and this parsha. So the Rabbeim, when they wrote letters, they also wrote it that way. So there are letters from the Rabbeim that were written in Parshas Vayeshev. They would probably write Gimel Parshas Vayeshev, or Dalet, or Hey. Whatever day of the week it comes out to be. So what does this show us? This shows us that Parshas, the name of this Sedra, is referred to by everyone as Parshas Vayeshev. Rashi right away, the beginning of Vayeshev tells us, Bikesh Yaakov leishav b'shalva. Yaakov wanted to sit in peace. Kafatz olav rugza shel Yosef. So immediately the problems with Yosef began. So what is the Sedra? Is it a Sedra of Vayeshev, or is it a Sedra of contrary to Vayeshev? The first word is Vayeshev Yaakov. Vayeshev means a peaceful type of a situation which Yaakov was in. Right away, what do we read about in the Torah? We read about in the Torah all the problems which Yaakov had. Problems that Yaakov had with Yosef. All the 17 years which Yosef was away from his home, and which caused tremendous aggravation to Yaakov. So what do we say? The name of this Sedra is Vayeshev. It's something, the title of the Sedra is contrary to what's discussed in the Sedra. In fact, Rashi right away at the beginning of the Sedra tells us, Bikesh Yaakov leishav b'shalva. Yaakov wanted to sit in peace. He wanted, and it did not remain that way. Bikesh Yaakov leishav b'shalva. Rashi says, Kafatz olav rugze shel Yosef. And the Rebbe says, and always in all areas, wherever we turn, we always see that everybody still refers to the title of the Sedra with the title of Vayeshev. So the Rebbe is explaining. We will be learning in Parshas Vayechi. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim shvayas chishana. That Yaakov lived in Mitzrayim for 17 years. So there's the famous Balaturim. Balaturim tells us that Yaakov's best years were in Mitzrayim. In fact, it's explained in Chassidus, how could we say that Yaakov's best years were in Mitzrayim? Not in Eretz Yisrael, but regardless, we do see that the Torah tells us that what was Yaakov's best years, it was these years in Mitzrayim. Now, Bikesh Yaakov leishav b'shalva. Yaakov wanted to sit in peace. Kafatz olav rugze shel Yosef, so he got involved into the problems of Yosef. These problems of Yosef, with that Yaakov had here with Yosef, this led to it that Yaakov should have 17 years of peace. When? Many years later. So the Rebbe is learning it different than we usually would learn. The Rebbe is teaching us that it is because of the incident of Yosef, because of Rugze shel Yosef, this brought Yaakov down to Mitzrayim. We know Chazal tell us that really Yaakov anyways had to wind up in Mitzrayim. So Chazal say that if not for the incident of Yosef, Yaakov would have been taken to Mitzrayim b'shal shaloi shel barzel, with iron chains. Yaakov had to be in Mitzrayim. Kodesh Baruch Hu has set it up in the way that Yaakov would have to come down to Mitzrayim, and that is when the Golus for Yaakov and the Shibud, which would be an outcome of Yaakov's coming to Mitzrayim. Memele, this thing that Rugze shel Yosef happened, This was something which was a plus for Yaakov. In other words, this led to it that Yaakov should have his Yashvus, his Vayeshev, when? Many years later. In other words, the years that Yaakov was in Mitzrayim, those were years of Vayeshev. As we will be reading, Vayechi Yaakov Beret Mitzrayim Shva'esre Shana, Shva'esre is Toiv. Number of 17 total is Toiv. Numeric value of Tes, Vov, and Beis, Toiv equals 17. So the Toiv years, the best years, the 17 best years of Yaakov's life was where that he had in Mitzrayim. Being that he had that in Mitzrayim, how did Yaakov come to that? This came as a result of Rugzei Shel Yosef, as a result of Yosef being taken away from his brothers and from his family, and ultimately he was sold down into Mitzrayim. And with the hunger years, and then later Yosef being appointed as a Mishnah LaMelech in Mitzrayim. Therefore, Yaakov had to come down to Mitzrayim to his son Yosef. Memela, these inyanim here, which we will read about, and obviously when we look at these inyanim, obviously these are not pleasant things. And we raise the question, how can we refer to these type of things as a Vayeshev? It's not a Vayeshev. It's not his Yashvus. It's not a relaxed type of situation, a relaxed type of life. On the contrary, it's problems. But the emesis, the truth is, it is these problems of now that have led ultimately to it that Yosef will lead to it that his father Yaakov will come down into Mitzrayim, and those will be years of Vayeshev. The Rebbe also, later in the Farbrengen, got back to an inyan which he spoke about last week, last Shabbos, and it was not concluded in the last Shabbos, the Farbrengen. Last week the Rebbe raised the question, the Pasuk tells us, Vateitze Dina, that Dina went out, and continues that problems began with Dina. Problem with Shem. So Rashi tells us she was a Yatzonis, she was an outgoer, like her mother Leah. That is why the Pasuk uses the expression Vateitze Dina Bas Leah, not Bas Yaakov. She was Yaakov's daughter. Usually we refer to a person by his father's, son of this and this father, or daughter of this and this father, because she was similar to Yaakov, rather similar to Leah, her mother. And being that her mother Leah was a Yatzonis, she too was a Yatzonis. In other words, outgoing, going out. Which, as we would learn simply, we always will be learning the Rashi, and we will hear in a few minutes how the Rebbe has enlightened us today in the Pshat and the Rashi, but normally we'd be learning that this is something which is not positive, something which is not a compliment on a Bas Yisrael. Because normally a Jewish daughter is called Kvuda Bas Melech Pnima, has to be more home, not to be an outgoing. And here, being that Dina was outgoing, similar to her mother Leah, this led to problems. So Rebbe asked the question, we know the Torah is very careful in discussing the character of a person. And we know always there's a klal, Zeicher Tzadik Levracha, whenever a Tzadik is mentioned, it's to bring bracha. And the same thing when we're talking about our mother Leah. Who was a Tzedekis? The Imois were Nevios. So it's also to bring praise and compliments to her and bring bracha. And here we see the Torah tells us something which obviously is not a compliment and not a praise regarding Dina or her mother Leah. This is the question which the Rebbe raised last week, last Shabbos, the Farbrengen, and did not answer it. Naturally, in the publications which came out during the week, various ha'aras hatmimims, various tirutzim were proposed by Bocharim and Yingalite and the yeshivas. Another question which the Rebbe asked is, why is it that the Pasuk says that Dina went out, lirois bivnois ha'aretz. She went out to look around, bivnois ha'aretz, and the girls of the country, of the land where they lived in. Pasuk should have said, bivnois Shem. She went to acquaint herself with the girls that lived in the city of Shem, where she was at the time. And this question also the Rebbe raised last week and did not answer it. Today the Rebbe is learning Dina Bateitze Dina Basleya. Dina's intention in being a yatzonis and going out was definitely a pure intention. Why did she go out? She wanted to go out and influence the people of the area where she lived. Just like Leah. Rabbi mentioned, where do we find that Leah was a yatzonis? Leah was also a yatzonis. She also went out so that to convince Yaakov so that another child will be born from them, and therefore they will be able to have another one of the Shvatim. So just like Leah's intention by being a yatzonis was with a pure intention, chas v'shalom, nothing in the negative way, the same thing was Dina's. Dina went out, lirois bivnois haaretz. She went out to look around at the girls of the country where she lived in. Why did she go? She wanted to utilize her good influence on them. So the Rebbe is learning completely different as we were learning till now the Rashi. Always we learned this Rashi that it is not a compliment neither on Leah, neither on Dina. The Rebbe says the contrary. Befeirish it is. It's a compliment to Leah. Leah was a yatzonis. Why did she go out? She went out to do good deeds and see to it that another one of the Shvatim will be born. And the same thing when we're talking about her daughter Dina, Dina's intention of being a yatzonis was also the same. Where do we find a basis for this? Rebbe says we read earlier in Chumash that when Yaakov met Esav, he divided his camp l'shtei machanos. Yosef was blocking his mother. Yosef was blocking his mother Rachel. We read all the details of what happened when Yaakov was about to confront his brother Esav. We also find in Rashi over there, Rashi raises a question. V'dina heichon hoisa. Where was Dina at that time? The pasuk tells us exactly what Yaakov did, how he divided all of the Shvatim and his wives. The pasuk, however, does not tell us what Yaakov did with Dina. So Rashi asks, V'dina heichon hoisa. And Rashi answers that Yaakov hid Dina. He hid her. Why? He did not want Esav to see her. He was afraid if Esav would see her, she may be attracted by Esav, and Yaakov did not want that to happen. And Rashi continues that Yaakov was punished for hiding Dina at that time, because could very well be, had he have not hidden Dina, and Esav would have seen Dina, Dina would have been that powerful to be able, and Dina would have married Esav, to see to it that Esav would not be an Esav, and she would be able to utilize her influence on Esav to hold him back from acting and being like an Esav. What do we see from all of this? From all of this we see who Dina was. And what type of potential, what type of koiches Dina had to influence people. And that is why, Chas v'shalom, the Torah is not talking in any negative way. The Torah is definitely talking in a positive way. Why did Dina go? Dina went liros b'vnei sa'aretz. She went liros b'vnei sa'aretz for what reason? For a simple reason, she wanted to utilize her good influence on them. Regarding the question, why the pasuk uses the expression b'vnei sa'aretz, so there's some that wanted to answer that the pasuk that couldn't have said b'vnei Shem, being that we're getting involved here with a detailed parsha regarding Shem, an individual by the name of Shem. You see, there was the city of Shem, and there was an individual by the name of Shem. So the pasuk couldn't use the expression lirois bivnoi Shem, because she didn't go out just to see the daughters of Shem, of the Shem family. She wanted to meet the girls of the entire city. Memela, the pasuk can't use the expression lirois bivnoi Shem, but the pasuk rather uses the expression lirois bivnoi Haaretz. But the only question still remains, if we look through the parsha, in last week's Sedre, we will see that many times the expression is repeated in the Sedre, Ha'ir, the city. Takenat Shem, because Shem is like a confusing point. Because Shem here, we're talking about the individual Shem, as well as the city of Shem, but at least we could say the city. Memela, here the expression could have been the same. She went out and she wanted to acquaint herself and utilize her influence. And this question still remained unanswered. In today's Sedra, the Rebbe found a similar question. Similar to the question asked in Parshas Vayishlach. But again, the Rebbe says the answer which was given in Parshas Vayishlach cannot be applicable here. And this, again, in today's Farbrengen remained with a question. We read before Chamishi, in Parshas Vayeshev, about the birth of Peretz and Zorach. So the pasuk uses the expression 4 times the word Yad regarding the birth of Zorach. In this week's Sedra before Hamishi, so Rashi tells us, Arba Yodois Ksuvos Kan. It is mentioned here 4 times the word Yad. Keneged. Arba Charomim Shamo al Ochan Sheyotze Mimenu. Ochan, who was a descendant of Zorach, went against 4 Cherems. Vayeshev, others say another thing. There were 4 items which Ochan took in the Cherem. This is again something which is not a praiseworthy, it's not an honor to Zorach, that Zorach had somebody who came out of him by the name of Ochan, and Ochan did not act properly. Still, right away, as soon as Zorach was born, the Torah is Meram, is an Inyan which tells us on some negative happenings which happened to his descendants. Furthermore, there's the question. If we look into Rashi, a few psukim prior to this, in Pasuk Chav Zayin, before Hamishi, where the pasuk says that she was giving birth to twins, Peretz and Zorach. So Rashi tells us the word twin, which in Hebrew is ta'imim, is written here Malay, Taf Aleph Vav Mem Yud Shlas Mem. It could be written without the Aleph, and it is written with the Aleph. Comes to tell us that both of these children who were born here, Peretz as well as Zorach, were both tzaddikim. So we can, otherwise we would learn that Zorach himself also wasn't proper. Mainly, he wasn't proper, so there's a remez right away to tell us that a descendant of his also wasn't proper. But being that this is not the case, Zorach himself was a tzaddik, as Rashi tells us. That is why the Torah uses the expression ta'imim malay. So the question arises: why is the Torah merames? Why the Torah hints us to something which happened many generations later with a descendant of Zorach, which is something which is in no way is it an honor to him. And at the same time we know how the Torah is extremely careful in discussing the personality of a person. And the Torah never wants to say anything bad regarding somebody. And here we have, regarding the birth of Zorach, as soon as Zorach was born, we are told that there was somebody who was a descendant of him many, many years later that committed crime. This is a question which should be answered, and the Rebbe left it open this afternoon. Probably we'll be getting back to it next Farbrengen, next Shabbos. It's customary in the Farbrengens, the Rebbe also learns an Indian that has a shaykhs to Shir of Rambam. According to the Chalukas HaRambam, the way the Rambam is divided into learning 3 prakim a day. In today's Rambam, it's discussed the halachas of a hin tzedek, the eif o tzedek, which means how careful we're supposed to be by giving a weight. That we are a storekeeper or a merchant who sells an item which is sold by weight. He has to be extremely careful to make sure that he's giving a true and accurate scale, true and accurate weight. And he's not fooling his customers by giving them the wrong weight, by selling them a pound and really it is a half a pound and the scale shows it's a pound, and he's fooling them. And the Rambam elaborates on the crime of somebody who is not adhering to this mitzvah of giving. The mitzvah is called a hin tzedek and an eifet tzedek. Why are they 2 expressions? In those days they had 2 different types of scales. There was a scale which was used for liquid, and there was scales which were used for substance items which are not liquid. But again, regardless what type of item we're talking about, we have to make sure that we give an honest and perfect scale. Then the Rambam tells us, the one who does not live up to this, it is considered that he's a kofer b'yetzias Mitzrayim. He denies that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has taken us out of Mitzrayim. So Rebbe asks the question, what contact is there between giving an honest scale and the inyan of Yetzias Mitzrayim? To such an extent that we say that the person who does not give an honest scale, he's considered like one who does not believe in Yetzias Mitzrayim? Here the Rebbe mentioned Bechlal that the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tmura, that all mitzvahs are given to straighten us out so that our minds and our hearts are, in other words, think straight and work straight and are honest and proper, and we do the right things. And Memele, the Rebbe says, based on this explanation, we can very well understand the importance of giving a proper scale, because we have to live up to a standard of being honest and reputable people. And this is what the Torah demands from us. However, it is still not understood why does the Rambam stress that the one who does not live up to this, the one who does not give an honest scale or an honest weight, it's considered that he's denying Yetzias Mitzrayim. Why? So here the Rebbe got into a inyan explaining Yetzias Mitzrayim and the inyan what really happened in Mitzrayim. On one hand, we are told, the Rebbe told us that we will be in Mitzrayim for a certain amount of years, and the Avodum v'inu oisam, that the Mitzrayim will keep us as slaves and they will torture us. So based on this, the question arises, why did the Rebbe punish the Mitzrayim? It wasn't their fault. This is what the Rebbe wanted. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's intention was that we should be slaves in Mitzrayim, and we should come out of Mitzrayim and then receive the Torah and then become His chosen nation. However, prior to that, the Rebbe wanted that we should be in Mitzrayim. So why was Paroi and the Mitzrayim, why were they punished? They didn't do obviously anything wrong. They fulfilled the will of Hashem. This is something which has a shaykhs to another inyan which the Rebbe spoke in the Yutes Kislev, the Farbrengen, which he referred to today again. But actually, this question arises any time when a person is hurt. If one is hurt, and one suffers a loss, so the fact that Reuven, for example, is to suffer the loss, this was already nigzam in Hashamayim that Reuven should suffer the loss. So really, what did Shimon do when Shimon was the one who caused them to lose this item, or caused them to have this financial loss? Shimon, on one hand, all he did was he fulfilled the will of Hashem. But on the other hand, there is nowhere where it says that Shimon is the one that's supposed to go out and do it. The Rebbe was the one that set aside, the Rebbe was the one that designated that Reuven is going to suffer a loss. But nowhere in the Torah, nowhere is it the will of Hashem, nowhere is it mentioned that Shimon is the one that's supposed to, that through him, Reuven is supposed to suffer the loss. Which is an in-depth inyan which actually has a shaykhs to major question, which is discussed in Hasidus and the Sifrei Hakira, which raises the question of Yediyah and Bechira. If the Rebbe knows in advance everything which is going to happen, on one hand, on the other hand, doesn't this take away our choice? We are told that we have Bechira, we have choice, whether we will choose the good or the no good. If the Rebbe is the one that knows what is going to happen, the Rebbe knows everything what's going to happen, he ought to... So, his knowledge in advance actually is dictating us what to do, because the Rebbe already knows what we will be doing. Which this is something which many pages in Hasidus and in Kabbalah and in Hakira is designated to explain this issue. In fact, the Rebbe quoted the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Shuvah raises this question regarding the Mitzrayim. V'alei kosav b'Torah, the Rambam asked, it's written in the Torah of Avodim v'inu oisam. So the Rebishter was the one who decreed that the Mitzrim should do bad and should be harmful to the Yidden. So why should they be punished? And the Ravid, who we know the Ravid is the one who disagrees with the Rambam at many occasions, gets very disappointed why the Rambam raises this question. The Rambam, he says, it's Chaye, Roishi uses an expression, Matani Yoimeshem Divrei Nairos. He says it's words of a yingle, of a youngster, what the Rambam is writing and raising this question. And he gets involved in a lengthy explanation, the Ravid. But the Rebbe today's Farbrengen, excuse me, the Rebbe today's Farbrengen answered it in several ways. He says, first of all, the Rebbe Shtaka wanted that the Yidden should be plagued by the Mitzrim. But once we're talking about each and every one of the Mitzrayim, each and every one of them, there were thousands of Mitzrayim, or more. They were able to get their way out. In other words, there's nowhere that it says that each and every Mitzri has to be involved in plaguing the Yidden. If not this Mitzri, it could have been another Mitzri. In other words, there's nowhere that told this specific Mitzri. There's no mitzvah which this specific Mitzri had to go out and be harmful to Yidden. He could have left it up to his neighbor. Why did he volunteer and go ahead and make it shlech to the Yidden? That is why he was punished for. Rebbe says all of these explanations could pertain regarding to all the Mitzrim as far as all the citizens of Mitzrayim. However, the question arises as far as Pari himself. Pari Melech Mitzrayim, he himself had no alternative. Because the Rebishter wanted that the Yidden should be plagued through Mitzrayim. The Yidden should be punished rather through Mitzrayim. It should be used as slaves through the Mitzrim. So true, Taka, when we're talking about individual Mitzrische citizens, we could say it didn't have to be this one, it could have been another one. It didn't have to be this one again, it could have been another one. But Pari, he was the king, he was the one that had to set the rules and regulations. Why should he be condemned for it? So the Rebbe is learning that Paroi, true, he had no alternative, but still there is nowhere that he was told that he had to mutcher the Yidden, he had to torture the Yidden to such a degree, to such an extent. In other words, he could have used the Yidden as slaves, but not make them work as hard as he did. Why did he really torture them to such an extent? This already he did out of his own enjoyment, how he wanted to harm the Yidden. And for that he was punished. The Yidden Taka had to be slaves in Mitzrayim. This was something which the Rebishter has arranged many, many years before. Then he told Avram Avinu that his children are going to go down to Mitzrayim and it's going to be Va'avodum V'inu Oisam Alba Meyashana. But in the Va'avodum, there's also limitations. There's also a shear, like the expression would go in Yiddish. In other words, it didn't have to be to such an extent as Pari did it. Here the Rebbe brought the Gemara. There's a Gemara that says, Gemara in Sanhedrin, regarding when one talks in somebody else to sin. So the Gemara says that where do we find the first example of this happening? We find it by the Nachash, by the snake. Nachash talking in Chava to sin with Eitz Hadas. So there the Gemara says that the Nachash really had a good excuse. Could have came to the Rabbeinu Shalom and said, what do you want from me? Divrei harav, v'divrei hatalmid, divrei mi shoymin. This is an expression in Gemara which is used as far as ein shaliach lidvar aveira, which means in the Torah we know there's a concept of shlichus. One can appoint somebody else to serve as his emissary, as his shaliach. However, if he sends him to do something wrong, to do an aveira, there's no union of shlichus then. And the Gemara applies the expression to it, divrei harav, v'divrei hatalmid, divrei mi shoymin. If you have instructions from the Rav, and you have instructions from the student, to whom do you listen? In other words, that guy sent me. So what if he sent me? But the Rebbe has told me different. The Rebbe, Hashem is who? The Harav. That guy's only a Talmud. Why should I listen to him? So it's no excuse to say that he told me to do so, that's why I did it. The same, the Gemara says, that the Nachash also could have used that excuse to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Nachash could have used the excuse to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Rabbeinu Shalom, what do you want from me? I talked in Chava to go against your will? True. But why did you listen to me? Divrei Arav. V'divrei Talmud, divrei Mishayim. She didn't have to listen to me. She knew that there's the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is different. Then I am only a Talmud. You are the Rav. Why should she have listened to me instead of listening to you? At any rate, we find, getting back to our Indian, we find that when the Yidden were in Mitzrayim, the Yidden worked what we would call an Avodas Perach. Avodas Perach means a very hard type of a labor. Chazal interpret, what does Avodas Perach mean? Perach, besides meaning Perach, strong labor, and a very unusual labor which the Yidden were driven to, it also explains the method which the Yidden were convinced to go into this type of labor. That Paro used a Perach, was very soft-spoken. Initially, he talked them into it. The Rebbe brought a Medrash. Medrash tells us that Paro himself, when he wanted to talk in the Yidden, they should work for him, he himself also joined them in the labor, in the hard work. And it wasn't as hard yet. And he himself made himself that it's not that he has something against the Yidden. He's getting everybody to work hard. And not only everybody, but he himself also went out there the first days and was schlepping bricks to make the Yidden feel that it's not something specifically against them, and he's joining with them. Later, naturally, he stopped. He got himself out of that, and got all the mitzvah out of it, and it was left something which was only on the Yidden. And the Yidden were working a tremendous labor, very, very hard for the years. As we read in Chumash, and Chazal tell us the hard type of labor which the Yidden had to go through. Memela, what type of attitude did Paro take when he was talking the Yidden into work? It was like a falseness. In other words, it was like a faker. Initially, he acted like he's also working. Then he acted like the Mitzrim are all working along, until he worked it out in such a way that the Yidden are the only ones working, and made them work in the most hardest and terrible way. How does one act, the Rebbe continues, when he gives a false scale? When one gives a false scale, he acts the same way. He makes himself like he's weighing the item. He doesn't just say, here, this is a pound. No, a customer comes in, he goes to the scale, and he makes himself and he acts that he's trying to give an accurate scale. But the truth is that the scale is a false one. So he's doing the same thing which Paro did. Paro, when he talked in the Yidden to work, it was also initially a perach, soft-spoken, and then he got them to work avodas perach. The same thing, when one does not give an honest scale in any way, it's the same idea of Shibud Mitzrayim. And that is why the Rambam tells us that the one who does not adhere to this mitzvah of giving an accurate and proper scale, hin tzedek, ve'efa tzedek, is considered that he's denying in Yitzias Mitzrayim. Why? Because this is the same idea of what happened by Mitzrayim. And the Rebbe has taken us out of Mitzrayim. And if the Rebbe does not want us to be Tachas Shibud Mitzrayim, and if he is doing such type of shtick, giving a false weight, a false scale, this is also a false type of an attitude. A false type of an attitude, this is what Paro did in Mitzrayim. And this is something which the Torah resents very much. And that is why the Rambam uses the expression that giving a false scale is compared to one who does that, he's compared to the one who denies in Yitzias Mitzrayim. Because it's the same type of falseness, same type of falschkeit, hypocrisy, which was going on by Paro, made himself one way and really was the other way. It's the same idea when one gives a false scale. The Farbrengen, the Rebbe did not get back to explain the Rashi as we said before. Until the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe gave mashke for several occasions, for several functions and dinners which will be taking place in the next few days. The Rebbe says we're in a rush to Mincha, He asked first that those that get the mashke should distribute part of the mashke during the Farbrengen and the rest of it at the function or dinner for whatever it was given. As well, he also mentioned that we're in a rush to Mincha, and this is a special Mincha, and it's a special Shabbos. Throughout the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also mentioned a few times that this is the Shabbos after Yutes Kislev, after the Chag HaChagim, the Yontev of Yontevs, which we celebrated this week, Yutes Kislev, and this is the Shabbos which is the Vayechulu, as explained on many occasions. The Rebbe spoke about it last week as well, that Shabbos uplifts the entire week and everything that has transpired in the entire week. The Mela, this is the Shabbos that uplifts also this great and outstanding day of Yutes Kislev, and this is the Shabbos where we are. From this Shabbos we are going into Chanukah. We are beginning to read Vayhi Miketz Shnosayim Yomim. It's the end. Vayhi Miketz. It's the end of. In other words, the Torah is talking about the period which was going on by Yosef while Yosef was in Mitzrayim. The Rebbe said, "Let it be Miketz. Let it be already an end. An end to what? An end to the Golus." And an end to all the dreams, because this is what we were reading about, that there were various dreams. Let it be an end to the time of dreaming, and should become a time of reality, a time when Mashiach will come and take us out of Gullus. It was here and early in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe was talking something which he has spoken about at previous occasions. The Rebbe speaks about it practically at every occasion, where the Rebbe was saying how Yidden are full with the wish of Daloi Gullus. Daloi is in Russian. Enough of Gullus. And we should be taken out of Gullus, and Mashiach Tzidkenu should come, B'meher v'yameinu, and take us out of Gullus, Mashiach now. A gute Woche, and a freilichen Chanukah.